When I bought the place, I thought I was buying peace. Real. Honest to God peace. The house wasn't anything fancy. Just a 3-bedroom ranch with faded blue siding and a big wraparound porch that needed some love. But what sold me wasn't the house. It was the lake. I still remember the first time the realtor brought me down the narrow path behind the house. We stepped out of the tree line, and there it was, a glassy, hidden lake, perfectly round, framed by tall oaks and pines like a secret in the forest. The water glimmered in the late afternoon light, dragonflies skimming the surface, and I felt something settle in my chest. "It's private," the realtor said, smiling at my expression. "The lake is deeded with the property. It's yours." I'd been looking for something quiet, someplace where I could wake up without car horns or neighbors' lawnmowers ruining the morning. Somewhere I could fish without paying for a permit or jostling for space at a public dock. The thought that I could own not just a slice of land, but the whole lake was more than I'd hoped for. I signed the papers a week later. Moving day was chaos. Boxes everywhere, my old couch wedged halfway through the front door, and the movers muttering under their breath. But even then, my mind kept drifting to the lake. The moment the last box was in, I grabbed my tackle box and rod from the truck and walked straight down the path. The lake was silent, perfectly still except for the ripples of a turtle slipping off a log. I sat down on the grassy bank and cast a line. I caught 3 bass in an hour. It felt like I had stepped into another life, one I'd been missing for years without realizing it. I stayed until dusk, the air cooling around me, fireflies blinking into existence along the tree line. When I finally trudged back up to the house, I was grinning like a fool for a few months. Everything was perfect. I developed a rhythm: coffee at dawn, a few hours of fishing before work, an evening spent on the porch watching the sun dip behind the trees. Some weekends I'd paddle around in an inflatable kayak I bought, exploring every inlet and shallow spot. It felt like my own private Eden. Then one Saturday afternoon, everything changed. I was on the dock I'd built, just a small wooden platform anchored with cinder blocks, when I heard the low whine of a motor. At first I thought it was a boat engine, but the sound came from the opposite shore. A moment later, a golf cart appeared through the trees, barreling down a narrow path. 2 men were riding it, both wearing polo shirts and sunglasses like they'd just come off a golf course. They stopped near the shore, tires crunching on gravel. "Hey!" the man on the passenger side shouted, pointing at me. "You can't fish here." I blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" "This is HOA property," he called back. "Fishing is for approved residents only. Do you have a permit?" I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the idea was so absurd I thought he had to be joking. "This is my property," I said, standing up. "I own the lake." The man frowned and got out of the cart, pulling a clipboard from under his arm. "No, sir, the lake is part of Willowbrook Commons. We maintain it for the neighborhood. If you want to fish here, you'll need to get an access tag from the HOA office." "You're mistaken," I said, my temper rising. "The lake is deeded with my parcel. It's on my property map. Do you have proof of that?" he asked smugly. "Yeah," I snapped. "In my house. Want me to go get it?" He crossed his arms. "Look, we can solve this the easy way or the hard way. If you insist on trespassing, we'll have to involve law enforcement." That's when I realized he wasn't joking. "Fine," I said. "Call them. Let's get this cleared up right now." He actually did it. Pulled out his phone and called the sheriff. 20 minutes later, a county cruiser pulled into my driveway. The deputy was polite, professional, one of those guys who had probably seen a lot worse than neighbor disputes. He walked down to the lake with us, listened as the HOA man explained that I was illegally fishing on common property, then turned to me. "You have proof this is part of your parcel?" "Yes," I said, leading him back up to the house. I grabbed the folder with my closing documents and flipped to the plat map. The deputy studied it carefully, tracing the lines with his finger. Then he nodded. "Yep. Lake's on your property," he said, handing it back. I looked at the HOA guy. His confident smirk had turned into a tight frown. "You've been using my lake without permission," I said. "That can't be right," he muttered. "We've always used this lake." "Then you've always been trespassing." The deputy gave me a small nod, tipped his hat, and headed back to his cruiser. The HOA men climbed into their cart red-faced and drove off without another word. I stood there for a long moment, heart still hammering. If they really believed the lake belonged to them, this wasn't over. And if they'd been using it all this time, what else had they been doing on my land? The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, still buzzing from the confrontation. My coffee sat untouched on the counter as I grabbed a pair of boots, a flashlight, and the folder with my deed. If the HOA thought they had a claim to my lake, I needed to know exactly what they'd been doing out there. The path on the far side of the lake wasn't obvious from my dock, but now that I was looking for it, it was easy to find. The trail was wider than I expected, more like a service road than a footpath, packed with crushed limestone and bordered by trimmed grass. Someone had been maintaining it for years. I followed it slowly, my boots crunching on the gravel, scanning the trees for signs. About 50 yards in, I found the first one, a weathered wooden post with the Willowbrook Commons HOA logo burned into it. Private property. Residents only. It read. I snorted. Another 50 yards and I found another sign. This one listing lake rules. No glass containers, no loud music. Catch and release only. Every new sign made my blood pressure tick up another notch. They weren't just using my land, they had claimed it. Then, after a long curve through the woods, I found the boathouse. It was a small, sturdy structure, maybe 8 by 12 feet, with peeling white paint and a padlocked door. A floating dock jutted out into the water, and on a nearby rack sat a metal canoe locked with a chain. I stood there for a long time, staring. This was my property. My lake. And this thing had clearly been here for years. Built and maintained without anyone ever asking permission from the landowner. I pulled out my phone and snapped a dozen pictures. Of the boathouse, the dock, the signs, everything. That night, I went online and pulled up the county property records again. The plat map confirmed what I already knew. The entire lake and a 50-foot buffer of shoreline were deeded with my parcel. The HOA's property line didn't come within 100 yards of the water. Then I pulled up satellite imagery and zoomed in. Sure enough, the trail I'd walked ran straight from the HOA clubhouse to the lake. That's when my curiosity turned to anger. They'd been treating my land like their private park for years, probably long before I ever bought the place. And now that I had the gall to actually use my own lake, they had the nerve to call the cops on me? Not happening. I spent the next day drafting a letter. It was direct and formal. Notice of trespass. To the Board of Willowbrook Commons, HOA. This letter serves as notice that you and your members are trespassing on my private property located at parcel number. This includes the construction, maintenance, and use of a boathouse, floating dock, canoe rack, and trail leading to the lake, none of which were authorized by me or any previous owner in writing. You are hereby ordered to remove all unauthorized structures and cease all use of the lake within 30 days of this notice. Failure to comply will result in legal action. I printed 3 copies. That evening, I hiked back out to the boathouse, taped one to the door, then posted another on the floating dock. The third I drove over and taped to the HOA clubhouse front door under the porch light. 2 days later, I got their response. It came in a heavy manila envelope stuffed with legal language and condescension. The letter claimed the community had established rights of use to the lake and threatened that if I blocked access, they would file suit for adverse possession or prescriptive easement. They accused me of attempting to monopolize a shared resource. I read it twice, then threw it on the table and started laughing. I wasn't a lawyer, but even I knew that was a bluff. The next morning, I called one. Her name was Marissa Blake, and from the first 5 minutes of our conversation, I knew I had the right person. They don't have a leg to stand on, she said after I emailed her the documents. Unless they can produce a recorded easement, they're just blowing smoke. Even if they've been using it for decades, that doesn't give them ownership rights, not in this state. So what do? We send them a cease and desist and give them 30 days to clear out. After that, we sue for damages. I liked her style. She drafted a letter that same day, far more formal and intimidating than mine, and sent it to the HOA's attorney by certified mail. That's when things got ugly. 3 days later, I came outside to find my mailbox spray-painted with big white letters, Community Lake. My trash cans had been tipped over and rolled halfway down the street. The next night, someone scattered nails across my driveway. I spent half an hour picking them up with a magnet. When I caught one of the board members lurking by my fence a few nights later, I called the sheriff. By the time a deputy arrived, the guy was gone, but I filed a report anyway. Then came the HOA meeting. Technically, I wasn't a member. My house wasn't part of Willowbrook Commons, but I showed up anyway. The room was packed, every folding chair taken. Greg, the HOA president, stood at the front, red-faced and loud. "This man is trying to steal what belongs to all of us," he shouted, pointing at me. "This lake has been a community gathering spot for years. He's threatening to take that away." I stood, calm as I could manage, and raised my voice. "This lake is on my property. I have the deed, the plat map, and the county records to prove it. You've been trespassing for years. That stops now." Half the room erupted in angry shouts. The other half looked stunned, like they were hearing this for the first time. "You can't do this!" Greg barked. "I can," I said evenly. "And if you don't remove your structures by the deadline, I'll see you in court." I left before they could start shouting again, my hands trembling with adrenaline. By the time I got home, I knew this wasn't going to end quietly. This was going to be a war. Filing the lawsuit felt like pulling the pin on a grenade. Marissa drafted a complaint that laid everything out in meticulous detail. The property deed, the plat map, the trail and boathouse photos, the trespass incidents, even the vandalism report I'd filed with the sheriff. We weren't just asking for removal of the structures, we were suing for damages, back rent for their exclusive use of my property, and legal fees. "They're going to hate this," Marissa said with a grin as she handed me a copy. "Good," I said. "Let them hate it." The summons went out the following Monday. 2 weeks later, the deposition started. I sat through everyone, even though Marissa said I didn't have to. I wanted to see them squirm. Greg was first. He came in wearing a suit that looked one size too small and a chip on his shoulder the size of a boulder. The court reporter swore him in, and Marissa started asking questions in that calm, surgical way of hers. "Mr. Collins, when did the HOA first begin using the lake?" "As long as I can remember," Greg said. "At least 20 years. "Do you have any written easement, license, or agreement from the property owner allowing such use?" He hesitated. "It's common property." "Everyone knows that. That's not what I asked." "Do you have any written documentation?" "No," he said finally, jaw tight. Marissa smiled slightly and moved on. Over the course of the deposition, Greg admitted that the HOA had paid for the construction of the boathouse, the maintenance of the trail, and the purchase of the canoe, all without permission from any owner of the land. "So you knowingly built and maintained structures on property that does not belong to you?" Marissa asked. "It's community property," Greg said again, voice rising. "According to the county, it is not," Marissa said, sliding a copy of the plat map across the table. "It belongs entirely to my client." Greg's face turned the color of a stop sign. The next deposition was even better. It turned out the HOA had been collecting lake access fees from residents for years, $50 a year per household, supposedly to maintain the lake. "Where did that money go?" Marissa asked. "Maintenance, mostly," said the treasurer, a wiry man with nervous hands. "Did any of it go to the legal owner of the property?" "No." "So you collected money for access to land you didn't own and kept all of it?" He swallowed hard. "Yes. By the end of the day, I was grinning like a kid at Christmas. They basically just admitted to running a pay-to-play racket on your land," Marissa said as we walked out. "This is going to be fun." Word spread fast after that. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, the clubhouse was standing room only. I didn't bother going this time, but my phone lit up all night with messages from neighbors. Greg had tried to paint me as the villain again, but several residents had started asking pointed questions about the lake fund. When Greg dodged, one of the residents, a guy named Tom, stood up and demanded to see the financial records. Things had gotten loud enough that someone had called the sheriff again, this time on the HOA. 2 days later, I was sitting on my porch when a black SUV pulled into my driveway. Out stepped Greg, his sunglasses off for once, his face pale. "We need to talk," he said. I leaned against the porch railing. "About what?" "This lawsuit," he said, glancing nervously at the lake. "It's tearing the community apart. People are furious. They want blood." "They should talk to their board," I said evenly. "You're the ones who trespassed. You're the ones who collected money for land you didn't own." His jaw worked. "We can settle this, quietly," No one needs to know what happened. Oh, they already know, I said. And we're not settling. You've had years of free access to my property. Now it's over. For a moment, I thought he might actually lose his temper right there on my porch, but he just turned, climbed back into the SUV, and drove off. That night, I set up trail cameras. I mounted one facing the boathouse, another covering the main trail entrance, and a third by my dock. It was a good thing I did. 3 nights later, the cameras caught Greg himself unlocking the boathouse, dragging the canoe into the water, and paddling out under the cover of darkness. I sent the footage straight to Marissa. She was delighted. Perfect, she said. We'll add it to the complaint as ongoing trespass. When Greg was served with the updated paperwork, he finally lost it. He left me a voicemail at midnight, screaming that I was ruining everything, that I was a selfish jerk who didn't care about community spirit. I saved the voicemail. 2. Meanwhile, the HOA board was starting to fracture. 2 members resigned within a week, citing personal reasons. Residents were showing up at Greg's house demanding refunds of their lake fees. Someone started a petition to remove the entire board, and through it all, I kept fishing. Morning after morning. I'd sit on my dock with a cup of coffee casting into the misty water, watching the chaos play out from a distance. One morning, I found that someone had left a note tacked to a tree near the trail entrance. "We support you," it said in big block letters. Below it, a dozen neighbors had signed their names. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. By the time the court date rolled around, the HOA was a wreck. Greg looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, and most of the remaining board members wouldn't even make eye contact with him. But me? I felt ready. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and floor polish, a mix that reminded me of school gyms and waiting rooms. Marissa and I sat at the plaintiff's table, our files neatly stacked, the trail camera footage queued up on a thumb drive. Across the aisle, Greg slumped at the defense table, whispering furiously to the HOA's attorney. When the judge walked in, the room went silent. "This is case number 22 CV-104. Collins et al. Versus my name," the clerk read. Marissa stood, calm and confident, and began laying out our case. She started with the plat map, pointing to the lake outlined clearly within my parcel. Then she moved to the photos, the boathouse, the dock, the trail signs, and finally the trail camera footage of Greg sneaking onto my property at night. "This is not a dispute over a shared resource, Your Honor," she said evenly. "This is a clear case of trespass and unauthorized use. For years, the Willowbrook Commons HOA collected fees for access to land they did not own, built structures on that land without permission, and continued to enter the property even after being served notice. Then it was Greg's turn. He started strong, talking about community tradition and long-standing neighborhood rights. But when the judge interrupted to ask for documentation of an easement, he faltered. "We don't have anything recorded," Greg admitted finally, his voice tight. The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly. After that, it was all downhill. Marissa cross-examined him until he was red-faced, confirming that yes, the HOA had charged residents for access, yes, they had built and maintained structures, and yes, they had continued to use the property even after being told to stop. The judge called a short recess, then came back with the ruling. "Based on the evidence presented," he said, "it is clear that the lake and surrounding shoreline are private property belonging to the plaintiff. The defendants are hereby ordered to remove all unauthorized structures, including the boathouse and dock, within 30 days. They are further ordered to cease all use of the property and pay damages and attorney fees totaling $43,500. Didn't cheer. Not in the courtroom, but I wanted to. Greg sat back, hard in his chair, face blank. The HOA attorney muttered something about considering an appeal, but even he didn't sound convinced. Outside the courthouse, several Willowbrook residents were waiting. "Good for you," one woman said, clapping me on the shoulder. "We've been trying to get rid of Greg for years. Maybe this will finally do it." It did. By the next HOA meeting, Greg had resigned for personal reasons. 2 other board members followed within days. A new slate of officers was elected, ones who seemed far more interested in repairing fences, literal and metaphorical, than fighting me. Within 3 weeks, a crew showed up with trucks and power tools. I stood at the edge of the trail with a cup of coffee as they tore down the boathouse, loaded the canoe rack onto a flatbed, and hauled it all away. When they were gone, the only evidence they'd ever been there was a patch of bare dirt and some crushed grass. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I didn't stop there. With Marissa's help, I had the trail entrances posted with bright metal private property, no trespassing signs registered with the county. I planted a row of cedar trees along the property line, a living barrier that would make sure nobody mistook the land for a park again. The first morning after the cedars went in, I woke before dawn, grabbed my rod, and walked down to the dock. The lake was still, glassy, a pale pink reflection of the sky above. For the first time in months, there was no sign of anyone else. No golf carts buzzing in the distance. No footprints on the shore, no sense of being watched, just me, the water, and the slow, patient tug of a fish on the line. I caught a fat largemouth bass that morning and laughed out loud as I released it back into the water. This was what I'd bought this place for. Peace. A week later, I got an envelope in the mail. It was from the new HOA president. Inside was a check, not for the full $43,500 yet. Those payments were scheduled over the next year, but for the first installment. There was also a handwritten note. We're sorry this happened. We want to make this right. The community supports you, and we'd like to avoid any future conflict. I pinned the note to the corkboard in my kitchen as a reminder. The war was over. The lake was mine again. And every time I cast a line into that still, perfect water. I thought about the night Greg had stood on my porch, begging me to back down, no chance.